There comes a moment in life when we ask, why did I have to go through that? Why did I have to endure the manipulation, the gaslighting, the endless cycles of hurt? Why did I have to love someone who only knew how to take? And maybe the most painful question of all, did I fail? I want you to hear me loud and clear. You did not fail. You were placed in that person's life for a reason, and whether you see it yet or not, you were successful in that mission. You showed them a love they couldn't give themselves. There's something profoundly painful about loving someone who doesn't know how to love themselves. It's like standing in front of a beautiful but locked door, knocking, waiting, hoping they will let you in, only to realize they don't even have the key. And the truth is, they don't want to find it. When you were in that relationship, you probably thought, if I just love them enough, they'll see how worthy they are. If I just give more, they'll finally feel safe. If I just prove to them that I'm not going anywhere, they'll stop pushing me away. That's the heart of an empathetic, deeply feeling person. You love with the hope that your love will heal. But what happens when you love someone who doesn't even believe in love the way you do? A narcissist doesn't experience love in the same way you do. They don't see it as connection, as safety, as mutual growth. They see it as currency, something they can extract, something they can use, something that keeps them from having to face their own emptiness. They take your love and try to fit it into a space in themselves that is hollow, but no matter how much you pour in, it never seems to be enough. And that is not a reflection of your love's worth. That is a reflection of the size of their wound. Because here's the thing, when someone is deeply insecure, when someone is terrified of their own unworthiness, they don't know how to receive love. They don't trust it. They don't believe in it. They might take it, but they will never hold it with both hands. Instead, they will test it. They will push you away to see if you come back. They will create chaos to see if you stay. They will wound you just to prove to themselves that love is always conditional, that abandonment is inevitable, that no one can truly love them as they are. And you, with your open heart, with your resilience, with your deep well of compassion, you stayed. You tried. You kept showing up, kept believing, kept offering the kind of love that they had never been able to give themselves. You weren't just giving them love, you were giving them a blueprint for something they had never learned. But the hardest truth to accept is this: not everyone who is shown love learns how to love in return. Some people reject it, some people twist it, some people fear it so much that they destroy it before it can take root. And that is not because you failed. It is not because your love was weak. It is because they were unwilling or unable to receive it. Think about what it means to truly receive love, to let it in fully, without question, without suspicion. It requires vulnerability. It requires self-worth. It requires the ability to sit with love instead of trying to control it. And for a narcissist, that is terrifying, because to let love in is to let go of the mask. To let love in is to face the wounds they've spent their entire lives avoiding. To let love in is to risk losing the power they think protects them. So they run, they sabotage, they hurt you before you can hurt them. They take what you give and never give back, not because they don't see its value, but because they don't know how to handle something so pure. And that is where your heartbreak lives, not in the loss of the relationship itself, but in the realization that no matter how much you loved them, they never let themselves fully receive it. But hear me when I say this. Your love still mattered. Your love still meant something. Because whether they ever acknowledge it or not, you gave them a glimpse of what was possible. You showed them something they will remember. Maybe it will haunt them. Maybe it will be a distant ache. Maybe it will be the only real thing they ever experienced before they pushed it away. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about them at all. Maybe it was about you. Maybe it was about proving to yourself that your capacity to love is deep and boundless, even in the face of someone who could not meet you there. Maybe it was about realizing that you are the kind of person who loves bravely, who loves fully, who offers what is real, even when it isn't returned. And maybe it was about showing yourself that love, real love, does not beg, does not chase, does not force itself into locked spaces. It stands strong, it shines brightly, and it leaves when it is not valued. because the love you gave was never wasted. It was never in vain. It was never a mistake. It was a reflection of who you are. And who you are is someone who knows how to love. You broke generational patterns. There's a weight we carry that doesn't belong to us. It's invisible, yet heavy. It's the echo of choices made before we even took our first breath. It's the unspoken rules that shaped our parents, our grandparents, and the generations before them. And for some of us, that weight comes in the form of dysfunctional love. Love that is conditional, manipulative, or full of unspoken debts. Love that demands suffering as proof of devotion. And without realizing it, you were born into a story that wasn't yours. For generations, there may have been a pattern in your family. Maybe the women before you stayed in toxic relationships because they were taught that leaving was selfish. Maybe love was measured in endurance rather than joy. Maybe boundaries were seen as betrayal. Maybe forgiveness was expected without accountability. Maybe silence was survival. Maybe self-sacrifice was worn like a badge of honor. And then there was you who felt something deep in your bones that whispered, this isn't how it's supposed to be. You who started questioning the dynamics that others simply accepted. You who recognized that just because something has always been a certain way doesn't mean it should stay that way. You who didn't just survive the narcissist, you saw them. And in seeing them, you saw the entire pattern stretching back through time, repeating itself generation after generation. Maybe it showed up in small ways at first. The way you started recognizing manipulation before it could sink its hooks into you. The way you no longer felt guilty for saying no. The way you questioned the idea that love and suffering had to exist in the same space. Maybe you caught yourself responding in a way that felt familiar, apologizing when you did nothing wrong, trying to earn love through self-sacrifice, and you stopped. You made a different choice. And that moment, that was you breaking a cycle. Because here's what no one tells you. Breaking generational patterns isn't just about what you walk away from. It's about what you refuse to pass down. It's about recognizing that you are the first in a long line of people to say, I deserve more than this. My worth is not up for negotiation. My love is not something to be drained, used, or exploited. And let's be honest, it's exhausting, it's terrifying, it's lonely. There's a reason these patterns survived for so long. They thrived in silence, in fear, in the belief that this is just how things are. And when you stand up and say, no more, you aren't just changing your life, you're shaking the foundation of an entire lineage. That's why the narcissist in your life was part of this journey. They were the mirror that forced you to see the cycle clearly. Maybe they reminded you of a parent, a grandparent, an old wound you had been carrying unknowingly. Maybe for the first time you realized that what you thought was love was actually control. Maybe you saw yourself bending, twisting, shrinking, just like someone in your family did before you. But the difference is you woke up. And waking up is painful. It means seeing everything for what it truly is. It means mourning the fairy tales you were told about love and family. It means grieving the hope that this time will be different. Because now you know it won't be, not unless you decide to be the one who changes things. So you step away, you unlearn, you do the work, you start building a version of love that isn't built on wounds. And the hardest part, you do it without a roadmap. There's no guidebook for breaking a pattern that has existed longer than you. There's no script for rewriting a love story that isn't about survival, but about thriving. But still, you do it. You build relationships based on trust rather than fear. You learn that love doesn't have to hurt. You teach your own heart, maybe even the next generation, that love can be safe, that boundaries are not weapons, that walking away from toxicity is an abandonment, it's self-respect. And even if no one in your family acknowledges it, even if they don't understand why you made different choices, even if they try to pull you back into the old way of being, you know the truth. You were the one who said, it ends with me. You learn to trust yourself again. There is a quiet kind of betrayal that leaves the deepest scars. Not the betrayal of others, but the betrayal of yourself. When you were caught in the storm of the narcissist manipulation, you started doubting things that once felt solid. You second-guessed your intuition. You questioned your perception of reality. You hesitated before making choices, afraid that somehow you were getting it wrong again, because that's what they do. They don't just lie, they make you doubt your truth. They don't just hurt you, they make you believe that maybe you deserved it. They don't just manipulate, they convince you that you can't trust your own mind. And that's the real wound, isn't it? Not just the things they did to you, but the way they made you lose faith in yourself. But here you are, waking up, rebuilding, learning to listen to that voice inside of you again, the one that was silenced, ignored, gaslit into oblivion. And that is no small thing, because learning to trust yourself again after being manipulated is one of the hardest, bravest things you will ever do. At first, it feels impossible. It feels like standing in front of a shattered mirror, trying to put the pieces back together, knowing that no matter how carefully you do it, the cracks will still be there. It's looking at every decision and wondering, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm being fooled again? What if I can't tell the difference between real and fake, safe and dangerous, love and control? But healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, quiet moments. It happens when you start listening to your gut instead of silencing it. It happens when you catch yourself justifying someone's bad behavior and finally stop mid-sentence. It happens when you feel that familiar pull towards self-doubt, but choose instead to trust that what you feel is real. And the truth is, your intuition was never broken. It was ignored. It was overruled by fear, by manipulation, by the desperate hope that maybe this time, if you just tried harder, it would all make sense. But deep down, you always knew. The red flags, you saw them. The uneasy feelings, you felt them. The way your body tensed when their energy shifted, you noticed. So now learning to trust yourself again isn't about creating something new. It's about returning to what was always there. It's about reclaiming your power. You start small. You listen when your body tells you that something feels off. You set a boundary and watch how it strengthens you. You make a decision without asking for permission or validation. You stop apologizing for things that don't require an apology. You remind yourself over and over, I am not crazy. I am not too sensitive. I am not imagining things. And then one day you realize that the voice in your head, the one that was once full of fear and doubt, is softer now, more steady, more sure. You start to feel safe in your own mind again. You start to trust that you will not abandon yourself the way you once did. And that is freedom. That is healing. That is power. You showed them accountability. Accountability is a language that a narcissist does not speak. It is a currency they do not trade in, a mirror they refuse to look into, because to be accountable means to acknowledge harm, to take ownership of actions, to sit with the discomfort of knowing you have caused pain. And that is something they have spent their entire lives avoiding. For so long, they lived in a world where blame was a game, and they always made sure they weren't the ones holding it when the music stopped. Excuses were their armor. Denial was their shield. And if all else failed, they would twist the story until you found yourself apologizing for something they did. That's how they survived, by dodging accountability at all costs. And then came you. You weren't like the others. Maybe at first you played along. Maybe you bent over backward, trying to explain, trying to make them see, trying to show them how their words and actions had consequences. Maybe you spent hours, days, years hoping that if you just said it the right way, if you just proved yourself enough, if you just loved them harder, they would finally get it. But they never did, because accountability isn't something you can force into someone. It's something they have to be willing to hold. And they weren't willing. So you did the one thing they never expected. You stopped arguing. You stopped explaining. You stopped chasing their acknowledgement like it was the missing piece of your healing. Instead, you stood firm in the truth. You refused to let them rewrite reality. You made it clear with your words, with your actions, and with your absence that you would not carry what was never yours to carry. And that shook them, because for the first time they were faced with something they couldn't manipulate, the truth, You see, the most powerful thing you can do to a narcissist isn't to scream at them or expose them or demand an apology they will never sincerely give. The most powerful thing you can do is stand in your truth so unapologetically that they have no choice but to see themselves clearly, even if just for a second. They may lash out. They may call you crazy, ungrateful, dramatic. They may try to convince others that you're the problem, that you're the one who changed, that they are the real victim. Because that's what happens when you shine a light on someone who has spent their whole life in the dark. They flinch, they rage, they retreat into their stories of innocence, painting themselves as the misunderstood hero. But deep down they know that you saw through them. They know that you recognized their patterns, their tactics, their carefully crafted illusions. They know that for the first time, someone wasn't playing along. And that will haunt them because the truth has a way of lingering. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need an audience. It just is. And even if they never admit it, even if they never say the words you long to hear, you were right, I was wrong, I hurt you, I'm sorry, you will know that you did something most people never do. You held up a mirror. You disrupted their cycle. You showed them what real accountability looks like, not through force, not through begging, but simply by refusing to accept anything less. And that is a victory they can never take from you. You walked away, and that was the lesson. Walking away isn't just an action. It's a statement. It's a boundary drawn in the sand. It's a declaration that says, I will no longer participate in my own suffering. But here's the thing. Walking away from a narcissist isn't like walking away from an ordinary relationship. It isn't just a breakup. It isn't just an ending. It's untangling yourself from an illusion, from a web of manipulation so carefully spun that for a while you believed it was love. It's stepping out of a role you were assigned without your consent. It's reclaiming parts of yourself you didn't even realize you had given away. And that is the lesson. Because a narcissist survives on power. Power over your emotions, power over your perception of reality, power over the version of yourself you think you have to be in order to be good enough for them. They push and pull, manipulate and gaslight, charm and discard, all in an effort to keep you on a leash of self-doubt. They make you question whether you can survive without them. They make you believe that leaving is losing, that walking away means you're weak, that if you were stronger, you would stay and prove yourself. But you didn't stay. You chose yourself. You chose peace over chaos. You chose clarity over confusion. You chose to trust your own instincts over their constant need to rewrite the truth. And for them, that was the most unbearable thing you could have done. Because in their world, they decide when the story ends. They decide when you're done. They decide how much of yourself you're allowed to keep. But you took that power back. And in doing so, you did something no amount of arguments, no amount of explanations, no amount of desperate pleas for accountability could ever do. You showed them that their control was an illusion. See, a narcissist doesn't truly fear losing you. They fear losing their grip on you. They fear the moment you realize that their love wasn't love, their apologies weren't apologies, their promises were just temporary distractions meant to keep you from leaving. They fear the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop trying to make them understand, the moment you no longer need their validation to know your own worth. Because when you walk away, you hold up a mirror they can't ignore. For the first time, they are left alone with themselves, with no one to absorb their chaos, no one to project their pain onto, no one to mold into a version of love that serves only them. And that is the consequence they never expected. But this isn't about them. It never really was. This is about you. Because walking away wasn't just the lesson for them, it was the lesson for you. The lesson that you are not defined by their inability to love you properly. The lesson that you are not responsible for fixing, healing, or enduring someone else's dysfunction. The lesson that you can stand on your own, unshaken, whole enough And maybe it didn't feel like a victory at first. Maybe it felt like breaking, like grieving, like losing something you worked so hard to hold together. Maybe there were nights when the doubt crept in, whispering, did I make a mistake? Will they ever change? Should I have tried harder? But then slowly the silence started to feel like peace. The absence of their chaos started to feel like freedom. The love you had spent so much energy pouring into them, trying to prove your worth, started turning inward. And that's when you realized walking away wasn't just an ending, it was the beginning of getting yourself back. You became who you were meant to be. There is a version of you that existed before the narcissist, a version that laughed freely, trusted deeply, loved without hesitation, a version that hadn't yet learned how it felt to be manipulated, gaslit, or made to believe that love was something you had to earn by shrinking yourself. But then little by little, that version of you got buried. Not all at once. No, narcissists are far too skilled for that. It happened in slow, almost imperceptible ways. The way they made you question your reality, the way they twisted your words until you doubted what you knew to be true, the way they drained you, not just of your energy, but of your essence. And for a while, you thought you had lost yourself. But here's what no one tells you. You were never lost. You were only hidden, buried under survival mode, buried under people pleasing, buried under the belief that if you just tried harder, loved more, forgave endlessly, they would finally see your worth. But they never did. Not because you weren't enough, but because they were never capable of seeing beyond themselves. And so you did the hardest thing anyone can do. You chose yourself. Not in the way the world romanticizes, with a grand, sweeping moment of self-realization. No, it happened in a series of small, quiet acts of defiance. It happened when you set a boundary and didn't explain yourself. It happened when you said no without guilt. It happened when you stopped looking for closure and made peace with the silence. It happened when you looked in the mirror and decided that piece by piece you were taking yourself back. And that is where you began to transform. Because when a narcissist exits your life, they don't just leave behind pain. They leave behind space. Space to heal, space to breathe, space to become. At first, that space feels unbearable. You don't know what to do with it. You don't know who you are without the cycle of chaos, without the emotional exhaustion, without the desperate need to prove your worth. But then slowly you begin to fill that space, not with their voice, but with your own. You rediscover laughter that isn't laced with anxiety. You rediscover rest that isn't interrupted by overanalyzing their words. You rediscover love, not the kind you had to beg for, but the kind that starts within. And that's when you realize you are not just recovering, you are becoming. Not the person you were before them, but someone even stronger. Someone who carries wisdom, not wounds. Someone who knows the depth of their own resilience. Someone who understands that being whole was never about being loved by the wrong people. It was about learning to love yourself enough to walk away. And that is who you were meant to be all along. You were successful, even if they never change. Success, when you've dealt with a narcissist, doesn't look the way you thought it would. It doesn't come wrapped in closure. It doesn't arrive with an apology. It doesn't come with the moment where they finally say, you were right, I was wrong, I should have treated you better. No, success in this journey is far more profound than that. Because real success isn't about changing them, it's about freeing yourself. For so long, you held on to the hope that if you just explained better, loved harder, forgave more, they would finally see it. You wanted them to have a breakthrough, to wake up, to recognize the pain they caused, to be better. Not just for you, but for them, for their own growth, for the people they will encounter after you, for the cycles that could be broken. But that's not how this works. Because change, real, lasting change, requires something a narcissist cannot do: accountability. And accountability requires self-awareness. the ability to sit with discomfort, to acknowledge fault, to face the truth without twisting it into something more convenient. And that is where they fall short. Every time. But here's what you need to understand. Your success was never tied to their growth. Your success was in recognizing the manipulation and no longer falling for it. Your success was in walking away when every part of you wanted to stay and prove your worth. Your success was in choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, yourself over their never-ending needs. Your success was in the healing you did after, in the way you rebuilt yourself, in the way you learned to trust yourself again. And that is something they will never be able to take away from you. Because here's the truth, narcissists rarely change, not because they can't, but because they won't. Change would require them to look inward, and looking inward means confronting the very things they've spent their whole lives running from. It means giving up control, letting go of the need to always be right, accepting that they are not the victim in every story. And so they continue as they always have, deflecting, blaming, avoiding. But you did the opposite. You faced yourself, you did the work, you sat with the pain instead of numbing it. You took responsibility for your healing, even though none of this was your fault. You learned to give yourself the love, the validation, the security you once sought from them. That is success. And maybe they'll go on repeating the same cycles with someone new. Maybe they'll continue their pattern, convincing themselves that they were never the problem. Maybe they will live their whole life without ever truly knowing themselves. But that has nothing to do with you, because your victory was never about changing them. It was about becoming the person they tried to convince you that you weren't. Strong, whole, free. And that is success beyond anything they will ever understand.